There is a hierarchy in suffering. Even in the most terrible place on earth, there is always a corner that is worse than everything else. If Auschwitz was the anus of the world, as some survivors described it, then Block 11 was its black, beating heart. For the 150,000 prisoners who barely survived in the main camp of Auschwitz, the first death was a constant companion. It was in the electrified fences, in typhus, in the hunger that gnawed at the bones, and in the greasy smoke of the crematoria. But there was a different fear, a sharp, paralyzing terror that silenced the barracks at night. It was not the fear of dying, but the fear of being sent there, to the red brick building located in the camp's southeast corner, the building that always had its shutters drawn, the building from which no one returned the same person if they returned at all. Block 11, the prison within the prison. While chaos ruled the rest of the camp, the capos' screams and the barking of dogs, Block 11 was wrapped in a sepulchral silence. An artificial, heavy silence, designed to amplify every footstep, every bolt, every groan. It was the Gestapo's private domain, a laboratory of cruelty, where the concentration camp's normal rules, work until you die, were suspended. You did not go there to work, you went there to suffer. There, the gas that would kill millions was tested for the first time. There, the art of killing a man without touching him was perfected, using only confinement and darkness. Today, we are going to cross that wooden door. We are going to descend the stone stairs that thousands went down and very few ever climbed back up. We are going to examine the records, the graffiti scratched with fingernails into plaster walls, and the testimonies of the few who escaped the clutches of Commander Grabner. Forget what you think you know about the Holocaust. This is not the story of Birkenau's industrial machinery. This is an intimate, claustrophobic, brutal story. This is the story of what happens when a human being decides to become, voluntarily and meticulously, a demon. Welcome to the Block of Death. Chronicle of Eternal Darkness. To understand the horror of Block 11, we first need to understand its geography. Auschwitz I, the base camp, was a former Polish army barracks. Solid red brick buildings, 2 or 3 stories tall, lined up in orderly rows. Seen from the air, they look harmless, almost institutional, like a university or an old hospital. But Block 11 had architectural features that gave it away. If you walked along the camp's main street, you could feel the temperature drop as you neared the right-hand corner. Block 11 was isolated from the rest by a stone and wood fence that connected to Block 10, the block of medical experiments. Between the two buildings, a close courtyard formed invisible from the outside, a dead-end alley paved with gravel and sand. But the most unsettling thing was the windows. Unlike the other blocks, the basement windows of Block 11 were covered by concrete baskets or external wooden boxes that kept light from entering and blocked the view. From the outside, the building looked blind. From the inside, it was a living tomb. The block's official function was to serve as the Kommandantur Rest, the camp's jail. It was the place of punishment for prisoners who broke the rules, attempting to escape, stealing food, sabotaging work, or simply looking at an SS officer the wrong way. But it also served as a pre-trial prison for Polish civilians from the Silesia region suspected of belonging to the resistance, who were brought in from outside to be interrogated by the Gestapo. A prisoner's journey to Block 11 almost always began the same way, with a shouted order on the roll call square. Häftling 3451. Report to the gate. The prisoner knew what that meant. His comrades instinctively stepped aside, as if the condemned man carried a contagious disease. No one said goodbye. No one looked him in the eyes. He was a dead man walking. Upon reaching the door of Block 11, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The SS guard at the entrance, the Blockführer, did not shout like the others. There, everything was procedure, cold, efficient bureaucracy. The entry was recorded in a ledger in impeccable Gothic handwriting: name, number, reason for arrest. Often, the reason was simply Bunker, a word that in Auschwitz was synonymous with indefinite torture. The ground floor of Block 11 looked, at first glance, like a normal administrative office. There were long corridors, waxed floors that shone under electric light, and numbered doors. It smelled of floor wax, stale tobacco, and leather, but there was an underlying smell, metallic and sweet, that no cleaning product could hide. It was the smell of concentrated fear and old blood. To the right of the main corridor was the guard room. Here, The men of the political section the camp's feared Gestapo, headed by Maximilian Grabner, relaxed. They drank schnapps, played cards, and listened to the radio while, only a few meters away, men and women were being destroyed. Grabner, a man with a bovine face and an arrogant stare, was the absolute master of this domain. He boasted that he could decide the life or death of any prisoner without even consulting the camp commandant, Rudolf Höss. For Grabner, Block 11 was his private kingdom. But the true bureaucratic terror unfolded in the improvised courtroom, the infamous Polizeistandgericht, or summary police court. Every few weeks, Gestapo dignitaries arrived from the city of Katowice. They sat at a long table covered with a green cloth in one of the rooms on the ground floor. It looked like a court. There was a judge, a clerk, minutes, seals. But it was a macabre farce. Civilian prisoners, men and women brought from the prisons of Mysłowice or Katowice, waited in the corridor, faces to the wall, unable to move. If they turned their heads, they received a rifle butt blow to the back of the neck. One by one, they were pushed into the room. The trial lasted on average between 60 seconds and 3 minutes. The Gestapo officer read out the name and the charge. Do you admit to listening to foreign radio? Do you admit to giving bread to partisans? The answer did not matter. Most of the time, the prisoner did not even have time to open his mouth. The judge glanced at the file, looked at the prisoner with boredom, and pronounced the sentence. Almost always the same. The judge simply made a gesture with his hand or marked a cross on the paper. A red cross. That cross meant Tod, death. If the prisoner was lucky, he was sentenced to the concentration camp, which gave him a life expectancy of 3 months. But most of those who entered the courtroom of Block 11 walked out with an immediate death sentence. What is chilling is not the injustice, but the administrative normality of the process. Between sentences, SS officers joked, passed cigarettes around, talked about their vacations or the quality of the food in the officers' mess. Meanwhile, a human being trembled in front of them, wetting himself with terror, knowing his life ended right there. Once the sentence was handed down, the condemned were not taken back to their cells. They were taken to the washrooms on the ground floor. There, they were ordered to undress, completely. Men and women together. Shame was the first tool of dehumanization before the end. They had to leave their clothes neatly folded. The Nazis hated disorder, even in the middle of a massacre. Naked, shivering from cold and fear, the victims waited. Sometimes, for hours listening to the shots coming from the courtyard, knowing each detonation meant the line was moving forward and their turn was closer. But before we reach the black wall or the basement bunkers, we must talk about another method of torture that took place on the upper floors, one that is often overlooked, the post, or hanging from the stake. In the attic of Block 11, under the wooden roof beams, the SS installed hooks in the rafters. It was a punishment reserved for camp prisoners who had committed minor infractions, such as trying to steal an extra piece of bread or smoking a cigarette during work. The punishment consisted of tying the prisoner's hands behind his back with a chain. Then he was lifted onto a stool and the chain was hooked to the ceiling. With a kick, the guard knocked the stool away. The weight of the body fell entirely on the shoulder joints, rotated backward into an unnatural position. The pain was blinding, instant. The tendons stretched to their limit, the shoulders dislocated from their sockets with a dry crack. The prisoner hung like that for an hour, sometimes 2. If he passed out from pain, a bucket of cold water was thrown over him to wake him up so he could keep suffering. The diabolical aspect of this punishment was not only the acute pain in the moment, but the aftermath. When they were lowered, the prisoner's arms were useless. They could not move them. They could not lift a shovel or a wheelbarrow. And in Auschwitz, if you could not work, you went to the gas. The prisoner who survived the stake torture in Block 11 knew he had been sentenced to a delayed death. He returned to his barracks with his arms hanging limp at his sides, unable to eat his soup without help, hoping the capo would not notice or waiting for the next selection by Dr. Mengele. It was a torture designed to turn a healthy man into a disposable cripple in 60 minutes. But let us leave the upper floors behind. The true notoriety of Block 11, the reason its name was whispered with dread from Norway to Greece, lay in what happened in the courtyard and, above all, underground. The courtyard between Blocks 10 and 11 was enclosed by high brick walls. The windows of Block 10, where the experiments took place, were boarded up with wooden planks, but the prisoners inside could hear. They heard everything. At the end of the courtyard stood a simple structure, almost banal, a wall built from black-painted logs, covered with a layer of cork and sound-absorbing material. The Schwarzwand, the black wall. The ground in front of it was not earth, but sand. Sand to absorb blood. Sand that had to be changed constantly because it turned into sticky, red mud. Execution at the black wall was not a military firing squad. It was slaughterhouse-style, clinical and dirty. The main executioner was not always a high-ranking officer. Often it was Rapportführer Gerhard Palitsch, described by survivors as the embodiment of emotionless sadism. Palitsch had a particular technique. He used a small-caliber rifle, a 6mm Flaubert, or sometimes a Walther P38 pistol. He did not want larger calibers because they made too much noise and shattered the head too violently, splattering his uniform. The condemned, naked, were brought out two at a time by the corpse carriers, Leichenträger Jewish prisoners from the Sonderkommando assigned to Block 11. They were made to run. Speed was essential to prevent resistance. They were grabbed by the arms and dragged to the wall. "Face the wall!" they shouted. The victim stood trembling, staring at the black wood stained with dried and fresh blood. Palitsch approached from behind, placed the barrel at the base of the skull, right where it meets the neck, and pulled the trigger. A dry crack. The body pitched forward or collapsed to its knees. Immediately, the corpse carriers ran in, grabbed the body by hands and feet, and threw it onto a pile in the corner of the courtyard. Meanwhile, the next pair of victims was already being dragged out through the door. It was an assembly line. It is said that Palitsch, on a day of good work, could personally execute 300 people without rest. He stopped only to reload and light a cigarette. There are testimonies that, on occasion, when transports arrived with children, Palitsch let the children play in the courtyard with a ball for a moment, before calling them one by one to shoot them. The prisoners in Block 10, spying through the cracks in the planks, counted the shots. They kept track of the dead. Sometimes, blood flowed in such quantity that it formed a small stream that crossed the courtyard and seeped out under the door toward the camp's main street. The SS had to build a special drain to prevent the blood from exposing the massacre in broad daylight. But the Black Wall was, in a sense, a quick death, a mercy. What awaited in the basement of Block 11 was far worse than death. It was the dissolution of the human mind. The stairs leading down are worn smooth by the guards' boots and the prisoners' bare feet. As you descend, the light changes. The air becomes damp and cold. Down here, the sounds of the camp do not reach. It is a sealed world. The basement had 28 cells, but not all were the same. There were 3 kinds of hell down here. The normal cells, already terrible, with a small barred window at ground level facing outside. The dark cells, with no light at all, where prisoners lost all sense of time and went blind. And finally, the standing cells, the Stehzelle. This is the point where Nazi cruelty crosses the line of torture and enters the realm of experimental engineering of suffering. The standing cells were not cells. They were niches, vertical holes in the wall. Imagine a space 90 by 90 centimeters, a square less than a meter across. Now imagine 4 adult men being forced into that space. They entered through a small door at floor level, like the door of a dog oven, and had to crawl inside. Once inside, they had to stand. 4 men pressed shoulder to shoulder, back to chest, breathing each other's stale breath. The door shut. Total darkness. How do you survive a night like that? You cannot sit, you cannot kneel. If you fall asleep and your knees buckle, your weight collapses onto the others, who shove and hit you to make you stand again because they are suffocating. The air ran out quickly. There was only a small 5-centimeter opening at the top for ventilation. The men gasped, fighting for a thread of oxygen. Body heat drove the temperature up until the niche became a steam bath of sweat and urine. Because there was no bucket, they had to urinate and defecate on themselves, standing, smearing their companions. This was not a punishment for an hour. It was a punishment for the entire night, 10 hours on their feet. And at dawn, the door opened. The men fell out like stiff blocks of wood, but they were not allowed to rest. They had to go to work 11 hours of forced labor digging trenches. And when they returned at night, back again to the standing cell, no one lasted more than a few weeks. Legs swelled until they seemed ready to burst. Massive edema, kidneys failed, madness took hold. Often, when guards opened the door in the morning, one of the 4 was already dead. But he was still standing, held upright by the pressure of the living bodies, who had spent the last hours clinging to a corpse that was warm, then cold, in absolute darkness. If the standing cells, the Stezel, were torture designed to break the body through exhaustion, the neighboring cells had a different purpose: to break the mind through absolute deprivation. Along the damp basement corridor, where the air smelled of mold and old urine, were the starvation cells. Here, the death sentence was not carried out with a bullet or a rope, it was carried out with time. Commander Karl Fritz, a man with a particular sadistic imagination, used these cells to punish escapes. The rule was simple and mathematical. For every prisoner who managed to escape the camp and was not recovered within 24 hours, 10 of his barrack mates were randomly selected to die of starvation in Block 11. To die of hunger and thirst in a concrete cell is not a peaceful death, as it is sometimes portrayed in film. It is a ferocious biological battle. The human body, deprived of water, begins to delirium from the third day. The tongue swells until it no longer fits in the mouth. The blood thickens. In desperation, prisoners drank their own urine, licked condensation from the walls, or tried to eat leather footwear. When SS guards made their rounds, they did not hear silence. They heard howling grown men reduced to caged animals, pounding on steel doors until their knuckles broke, screaming the names of family members who were not there. It was in one of these cells, number 18, that one of the most famous yet least forensically analyzed events in the history of Auschwitz occurred. July 1941. A prisoner has escaped. Sirens wail. The roll call on the square lasts for hours under the blazing sun. In the end, the fugitive does not appear. Commander Fritsch walks along the ranks and points to 10 men. One of them, Franciszek Gajoniczek, breaks down crying and shouting, "My wife! My children!" Then a small man steps forward, wearing round metal-framed glasses and the number 16670 sewn onto his striped uniform. Maximilian Kolbe, a Catholic priest. He does not plead for mercy. He asks for an exchange. He asks to take the place of the family man. What happened next inside Block 11 is what we want to analyze. The 10 men were stripped and thrown into the darkness of cell 18. No water, no food. Normally, under these conditions, the bunker became a madhouse of cannibalism and violence within days. Prisoners attacked one another out of desperation. But the Bunker Jakob, the prisoner responsible for removing the buckets of excrement and the bodies, reported something unheard of to his superiors. From cell 18 came no screams or curses. There were hymns. Kolbe had organized the dying men. They prayed, they sang. He turned the torture chamber into a kind of sacred crypt. But biology is relentless. One by one, the men died, collapsing onto the concrete floor, their bodies consumed down to the bone. After 2 weeks, only 4 were still alive. Kolbe was the only one who remained conscious. He sat among the corpses of his companions, leaning against the wall, staring at the door with a high fever, but with an unnatural calm. For the SS, this was unacceptable. The bunker was needed for new victims. Kolbe's biological resistance was an insult to German efficiency. On August 14, they brought in Hans Bock, the German criminal in charge of the infirmary, notorious for his brutality. Bock carried a syringe filled with phenol, carbolic acid. A phenol injection is an atrocious death. It was injected directly into the left ventricle of the heart with a long needle. The acid burns the cardiac tissue and causes an immediate and painful circulatory collapse, followed by paralysis. According to the testimony of the block caretaker, Bruno Borgoviec, Kolbe did not struggle. He extended his left arm skeletal toward the executioner. It was the end of a man, but the beginning of a legend that even SS guards spoke about in low voices in the canteen, unable to comprehend that kind of strength. And yet, the basement of Block 11 holds an even darker secret, a secret that would change the history of humanity and turn it into an industrial nightmare. It was here, not in Birkenau, that the Holocaust as we know it was born. Until the summer of 1941, the Nazis executed their victims primarily through mass shootings on the Eastern Front, the Einsatzgruppen. But this method had problems. It was slow, it consumed ammunition, and it shattered the morale of the German men who had to look women and children in the eyes as they murdered them. Himmler sought a cleaner, more distant way to kill. In late August or early September 1941, the exact date is debated, but the facts are not. Deputy Commandant Karl Fritsch decided to carry out an improvised experiment. He had noticed that the camp's disinfection company used a crystalline pesticide called Zyklon B to kill lice in clothing. It was hydrogen cyanide, stabilized on diatomaceous earth. If it killed insects, Fritsch reasoned, it would kill human parasites. They chose the basement of Block 11 as a laboratory. They selected 600 Soviet prisoners of war and about 250 sick Polish prisoners taken from the camp hospital. They shoved them down into the basement cells. The procedure was crude and terrifying. The basement windows were at ground level. SS men covered them with earth and rubble to seal off the air, but it was not airtight. An SS officer, protected by a gas mask, opened one of the window vents, tore open the Zyklon B can, and poured the purple granules over the heads of the men packed below. Then they slammed the window shut. What happened inside was not the quick death later perfected in the large gas chambers. It was a slow agony. The basement was large, cold, and damp. The gas needs heat to evaporate from the crystals. Without enough heat, the gas was released very slowly. The prisoners did not die. They coughed, choked, screamed, and pounded on the doors. Panic was total. The experiment dragged through the night. The next day, when Fritsch ordered the doors open for inspection, he found a Dantean scene. Many prisoners were still alive, crawling among corpses and vomit, moaning with burned lungs yet still functioning. The SS, furious at the inefficiency, shut the doors again, sealed the cracks more tightly, and poured in more cans of Zyklon B. It took 2 full days to silence the basement. When they finally opened the doors and ventilated the gas, the dirty work fell, as always, to other prisoners. A special group was sent into the basement. They had to disentangle the mass of 850 corpses, many frozen in a rictus of horror, fingernails dug into their neighbors' flesh. The bodies were carried up the stairs one by one during the night, loaded onto carts, and taken to the ovens of Crematorium I. This event in the basement of Block 11 was the turning point. It was the proof of concept. Fritsch reported to Höss, "It works." From that moment on, Auschwitz ceased to be only a brutal concentration camp and became a factory of death. Block 11 had given birth to the monster. But we cannot speak of Block 11 without mentioning the invisible figures who lived in its shadows, the block workers. Prisoners assigned to work there, such as the Schreiber, clerk, or the Calfactors cleaners. One of the most harrowing testimonies comes from survivors' memoirs about Jakob, a Jewish cleaner. Jakob lived in the block. He slept there. His job was to clean blood from the floor after Gestapo interrogations and to carry the bodies from the wall. Imagine the psychology of this man. Jakob watched his comrades enter, heard their torture, cleaned their remains, and then went to sleep in a neighboring cell. He knew he himself was a carrier of secrets, a Geheimnisträger, and that his execution was only a matter of time. These prisoners developed a complete mental dissociation. They cleaned the torture horse, a wooden instrument to which prisoners were tied and whipped on the buttocks until the skin split and the kidneys were exposed, with the same efficiency as a waiter wiping a table. They had to. If the SS found a stain of dried blood, the cleaner took the victim's place. Block 11 had its own accounting system, the bunker book. Every entry, every exit, every death was recorded meticulously. The Nazis were obsessed with the legal order of their crimes. If a prisoner died during excessive torture, the SS doctor signed a false death certificate, heart failure, or pneumonia. The truth remained trapped between brick walls. On the upper floors, meanwhile, the political section's interrogations continued. The room known as the tram was another invention of sadism, a room where prisoners had to wait their turn to be tortured. Why tram? Because there were ceiling bars and straps, like those in a tram where passengers hold on. But here, prisoners were forced to remain in impossible positions, or hanging, while they waited. The psychological torture of watching the man in front of you dragged into the interrogation room, seeing him return as a bloody, unrecognizable mass, and knowing you were next, broke the will to resist before the first question was even asked. There are graffiti on the walls of the basement cells that can still be seen today if you visit the museum with a powerful flashlight. Names, dates, drawings of crosses, final messages scratched with broken fingernails or with hidden belt buckles. Joseph, goodbye. God, help me. They are the only mute witnesses to the last hours of thousands of Polish patriots and members of the resistance who ended their days in the damp darkness of Block 11. They did not die like soldiers on a battlefield. They died alone, filthy, in the dark at the hands of bureaucrats who then went home to eat dinner with their families in villas located only a few hundred meters from the camp. Block 11 was not only a place of anonymous death. Between its red brick walls and damp cells, One of the most tragic and defiant love stories of the 20th century was also written a story that proved that even under Gestapo torture, the human spirit could refuse to be broken. Summer 1944. The camp is saturated. Birkenau's crematoria run day and night. But in the main camp, Auschwitz I, 2 prisoners plan the impossible. He is Edek Galiński, a Pole who has been in the camp since the first transport's prisoner number 531. She is Mala Zimetbaum, a brilliant Belgian Jew who speaks several languages and works as a messenger, giving her some freedom of movement. They have fallen in love in the place where love is forbidden. Their escape plan is bold. Edek obtains an SS uniform and a pistol. Mala disguises herself as a prisoner being escorted. They manage to walk out through the main gate, deceiving the guards with forged passes. For 2 weeks they are free, 2 weeks of clean air, of sleeping under the stars without fear of roll call. But freedom is brief. They are captured at the border with Slovakia. They are not taken just anywhere. They are taken to Block 11. Here the ordeal begins. Edek and Mala are locked in separate basement cells. The Gestapo wants to know who gave them the uniform. They want names. The interrogations are brutal. Edek is hung from the stake, beaten until his body is a mass of bruises. Mala is tortured with equal ferocity. But in the silence of Block 11, the miracle of resistance occurs. Neither speaks. They betray no one. Even in separate cells, they find ways to communicate. Edek carves their names into the wall of his cell, Mala and Edek. Through a compassionate SS guard, an absolute rarity, or through the prisoner cleaners, they manage to exchange small scraps of paper. Edek sings Italian songs from his basement window, so Mala will know he is still alive. The execution of Edek and Mala was not private. The SS wanted a spectacle to terrorize the others. Edek was led to the gallows in front of his fellow male prisoners. But Edek did not give them the pleasure of killing him. Before the executioner read the sentence, Edek shouted, "Long live Poland," and kicked the stool away himself. He died on his own terms. Mala, in the women's camp, did something even more shocking. While the SS commandant read her sentence in front of thousands of lined-up female prisoners, Mala pulled out a razor blade she had hidden in her hair and slit the veins in her wrist right there, in front of everyone. The SS officer, furious that his prey was slipping away, ran toward her. Mala, with her bloodied hand, slapped him across the face with all her strength. Imagine the scene, a Jewish prisoner, bleeding, striking a Nazi officer in front of the entire camp. The SS lunged at her. They did not allow her to bleed to death. They ordered her taken to the infirmary to stop the hemorrhage, only so they could execute her or burn her alive afterward. According to witnesses, Mala died on the way to the crematorium, having won her last battle. She died free of fear. This story resonates in Block 11 because it shows that walls could imprison bodies, but they did not always extinguish minds. There were other acts of silent resistance. Polish political prisoners created an invisible communication network. The Grip's tiny messages written on cigarette paper or on scraps of cement sacks. They were hidden in the most unlikely places, inside a hollowed piece of bread, in the seams of trousers, or left in specific cracks of the washrooms that resistance cleaners checked. These messages informed the outside world who had been arrested, who had been executed at the Black Wall, and what the Gestapo was asking. Thanks to these stained, crumpled slips that made their way out of Block 11, the resistance in the main camp knew whom to protect and which lies to maintain during interrogations. Block 11, designed to be a black hole of information, had leaks. As 1944 progressed and the Soviets drew nearer, activity at the Black Wall became frantic. No more sham trials. It was direct extermination. Trucks arrived, loaded with civilians, unloaded them in the courtyard. Bursts of gunfire were heard, and the trucks drove out with corpses dripping blood. The sand in the courtyard had to be removed entirely and replaced several times because the ground no longer drained. It was saturated with fat and fluids. Finally, January 1945 arrived. The evacuation. In the chaos of flight, the Gestapo officers of Block 11, including the sadistic Grabner, tried to erase their tracks. They burned the bunker files. They burned the execution lists. They destroyed the Black Wall, dismantling the logs and the cork, so there would be no evidence of the exact place of the executions. But they did not have time to destroy the building. When the last prisoners left on the death marches, Block 11 stood empty. Its doors were left open, creaking in the icy wind. The basement cells, which had held so much agony, fell silent for the first time in 5 years. The echoes of screams faded, leaving only the physical testimony of the walls. Today, Block 11 still stands. It is part of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. Of all the places that can be visited in the camp, this is the one most visitors describe as impossible to endure. When you enter, the smell hits you first. Despite the years, despite ventilation and millions of tourists, the basement smells of cold damp, of old earth, and of something else, something indefinable that raises the hair on your skin. If you go down the stairs and walk toward the standing cells, you will see them. The small doors at floor level are still there. You can peer inside and try to imagine how 4 men could fit in there. But modern imagination fails in the face of that reality. If you step into the cells where prisoners waited for execution, and if you light the walls carefully, you will see the final legacy. They are not damp stains, they are marks. Thousands of marks. Names, dates, crosses, stars of David, some carved with a nail. Others, and these are the ones that break your heart, made with fingernails. Deep scratches in plaster and brick. Joseph, Tadeusz, 1943. Mom, they are screams frozen in time. They are the forensic proof that human beings were there who, in their last moments of absolute terror, only wanted to leave evidence that they existed. They wanted someone, someday, to know they had been there. The black wall we see today in the courtyard is a reconstruction. The original was dismantled by the Nazis, but the ground is the same. The gravel you walk on is mixed with the molecular history of thousands of interrupted lives. Auschwitz had many faces. It had the industrial face of Birkenau's gas chambers. It had the medical face of Mengele's experiments. But Block 11 was its most intimate and cruel face. It was the place where evil looked its victim in the eyes from inches away and smiled. The legacy of Block 11 is not only a brick building, it is an eternal warning. It reminds us that civilization, laws, and human rights are fragile, that a desk, an official stamp, and an ideology of hate are enough to turn any basement into the antechamber of hell. When you leave Block 11 and return to daylight, you feel a physical need to breathe deeply to fill your lungs with clean air. Because inside, in the darkness of the standing cells and the starvation bunkers, a part of humanity was trapped that we may never recover. The doors are open now, but for the thousands who entered and never came out, Block 11 remains and will always remain the end of the world.